Thank you. We love you guys so much, too. Last Sunday, Darlene and I did something different. Before we were going to spend less time in downtown LA, we went down to the Roman Catholic Cathedral that's down there. I don't know if any of you have ever toured it. Yeah, it's so beautiful, and there's a mausoleum underneath it with just tons of crypts and places you can be buried or have your ashes there. And you know how people often put like a word or a phrase on there? I've never known what my word or phrase would be on my gravestone or my crypt, but after last Sunday, that word came up that you just heard again, approachable. So I said to Darlene, on my mausoleum, I wanted one word, approachable. So I hope we've been that, both Darlene and I, Pastor Jason and others have been that to you guys. I've been in so many churches over the years where you couldn't find the pastor. You saw him on a stage and then you just didn't know how to access them or you didn't get a chance to talk to them. And I want you to know, we've all loved just the many, many hundreds, maybe thousands of conversations we've had with all of you. They mark us deeply, so much, and it's just great. It's both very joyful for the year that we've been here and very sad that it's the last Sunday for us. But the cool part was what I wanted to share with you fits right in the midst of this series that Pastor Phyllis actually kind of framed for us and came up with, which is our story's God's story. And I just want you to know that you are now part of my story in the deepest of ways, and I say that with utter sincerity. And I wanted to spend some time talking about that this morning because our stories influence and are influenced by what we experience. Our experiences really mark us. My greatest context for what has shaped my story has been the churches I've been a part of since I was 11 years old. Little junior high kid, didn't know the Lord, went to a school related to a church, accepted Christ, and decided, I think I belong here. I think God loves me. I think I have a hope in this. And literally at that same age, felt like I wanted to be a pastor. So weird to think about that in 7th grade, God could talk to a little kid who was 11 years old and do what's sometimes called a call to ministry. And that shaping has been the result of being in the church for all those years. I'm 62 now. I just had a birthday last week, by the way. And that's a lot of years. And but it's also been marked by some pain and some trauma. And I've told you that lots of times in sermons because we are all in the midst of going through pain, trauma, loss. We have to grieve those losses and mourn those losses. That's why we have a church community, right? To support us in the midst of some of those things. Some of that. And I want to contrast something for you because I feel like when I look at all the churches I've been a part of, I've always been attracted to messed up churches. I don't know why. I'm not exactly sure why. I've been on staff at 10 churches over the past 45 years. 8 of those was in a pastoral role, and then worked with hundreds of other churches and thousands of other leaders. But some of these stories I just sat and reflected this week, and for a very specific reason. So just go on a little quick journey with me so I can reflect with you. This review from my middle school years, the very first church I was a part of, had a membership meeting that my mom and I decided to go to. And I think I told you this story before, but the members got a red badge, and they got to vote. And if you weren't a member, which we weren't at the time, we didn't get to vote. But all I remember as a junior high kid from that church meeting is a bunch of people standing in an auditorium yelling at each other across the auditorium. And I'm like, what is this? I love Jesus. I want to sing some songs. I want to hear from the Bible. What's going on in this church? My high school, college years were in a big mega church that I was a part of that truly marked me in many great ways. But now that church has been shown to be a protector of perpetrators who have victimized their wives and had all kinds of abuse. And that church has gone on to protect the perpetrators and throw the women under the bus. And I look at that and I'm like, but why, God, why? My first full-time ministry, you've heard this story a number of times, was a church where I was their youth pastor. I was a youth pastor for 4 years. I loved working with youth. Darlene and I both did. And they had kicked out their previous 3 pastors. And when they kicked out the last one, they looked at me and they said, can you run the church? And I'm like, I don't know, I'll give it a try. And I did, but that was such a hard place of tension and conflict. And the last quote I remember was when one of the pastors looked at me and he said, I don't know if it's ever justifiable for a Christian to be depressed. And I've shared that with you before as well. The next church that I looked to try to recover from that one was a fairly new church, and it was going really well until a friend of ours was in counseling with one of the pastors and gossiped personal information about us, to which the pastor she shared it with gossiped to others, making it a year for Darlene and I of nothing but putting out fires. Whew. I'm like, this is rough. Then I went to another church, and well, at that point, I tried to start a new church with some friends, and two friends actually, as a team pastoring concept, because I've always loved the concept of teams. And I figured that it would be better than what I'd experienced in the previous churches, but one of those friends lied to me for 6 months about the way he wanted to see the leadership to be structured. And when I confronted him about what he said, "Why did you lie to me?" he said, "Because I knew if I told you the truth, you would leave the church." So lying, I guess, is better to keep someone than it is to tell them the truth and let them make their choice. That was really rough, that one. Then I became an outreach pastor at a church where the senior pastor wanted to know intimate details about people's lives from all of us that were on staff and wanted it to be shared with him under the guise of prayer. I want to pray for these people, so tell me everything you know about them. Does that feel a little off to you? It should, right? And it was. So he really just used it to kind of control people and manipulate people into joining or staying at the church, but it just never felt right. Then I tried to plant a church that would be my own church, this time by myself, and quickly learned that not only is it really hard to do anything by yourself, and I don't recommend that, by the way, but a lot of people don't want to be part of a new church. So when a new church does start, like New City, that's an amazing thing. When it's 17 years old, as Pastor James just shared, I think that's awesome. And then I joined the staff of a larger church as their small groups pastor, where the lead pastor had such high expectations of all the staff who were frustrated and burning out that on the same day, the worship pastor and the executive pastor both resigned on the same day. And they were two of the most wonderful, both female pastors, the worship pastor and executive pastor, that I'd ever met, so competent. They resigned, and I'm like, now what are we going to do? And then the last church where I was lead pastor was literally pulled apart by tensions produced because the teaching pastor wanted everyone to follow him and his vision, and it was rough, and that church no longer exists. So I've experienced so many feelings and hurts and abuses within the church. Right? You think about it in the Bible, it's like, yeah, that should happen out in the world, right? To those that aren't part of the church. But why does that happen inside the church? I felt anger, defending abuse, shaming the vulnerable, gossip, deception, control, struggle, expectations, arrogance, and I could go on and on and on. So why do I tell you all those stories? Because it feels really negative. A couple reasons. One, I want you to see what a miracle it is that Darlene and I would still step foot in a church and give it a chance, and give it another chance when it can be a place of potential hurt or abuse or trauma. But there's a second reason I tell you that story. Because on January 14th, 2024, last year, I decided to visit New City Church for the first time. And when Darlene and I walked out, we said, as we walked out those doors and walked onto Spring Street and walked to the parking lot, we could be part of a church like that. You're different. You're different. Then at the beginning of March, I became the transitional pastor at New City, which has been an awesome experience. And I knew at the very beginning that I would learn as much from you as hopefully you would learn from me or from us at Soul Leader. And that has been true. So today's a little bit different. I want to share with you what I've learned from you, what I've learned from New City Church. And you know that phrase, you might be the only Bible people will ever read? Well, you're the Bible people are reading, and I'm reading you this morning. And I want to reflect back to you the things that I've learned. Now, I could talk a lot. I actually sat and prepared a list, and I came up with 10 or more things. And I'm like, there's no way I can squeeze that into a 25-minute sermon. It's just not going to happen. So I chose the main three. I chose the three that kind of came to the top, and I want to share them with you. Okay, so here's some of the best things I've learned from you as the top three things. Number one, that the homogeneous unit principle can be proven wrong. You're like, what? What are you talking about? Well, a couple of you know, if you've been to seminary, you might have heard this, or if you've read a book, but let me tell you what this is, okay? The homogeneous unit principle, and you are proving it wrong, and I think that's amazing. The word homogeneous means of the same kind, okay? So people of the same kind. There was a professor at Fuller Seminary down the road in Pasadena, and some of you know this story. His name was Donald McGavran, and back in the 60s and 70s, he wrote on church growth and taught on church growth. He was professor of church growth, and he wrote a book called Understanding Church Growth, and in that book, he talked about that people like to become Christians and attend churches without crossing racial, linguistic, or class barriers. Conversion, he said, should occur with a minimum of social dislocation. You do me a favor? Look around you for just a second. What do you see? What do you see? What kind of people? Lots of people. Do you look the same? Are you the same? No. And that's what makes New City so beautiful. You aren't homogeneous. You aren't. You're heterogeneous, okay? You're different kinds. You're from all different backgrounds of different color and races and creeds and jobs and educations and so many things. And Darlene and I have said to each other, now, how are we ever going to go to another church full of white people? That's so boring. Have we said this? Well, it's so boring. Guys, you wrecked us. You wrecked us. I've heard quite a few churches, and this makes me laugh, describe each other as multi-ethnic, which usually to them translated means they have one black person on the worship team, or an Asian family who comes twice a year, or a Hispanic janitor. And they call themselves multi-ethnic. I'm totally serious. I'm not making this up. And then they see themselves as multi-ethnic. You've wrecked me for that. I'm like, hey guys, you want to see I'm going to be sending people your way. So if you see people sit and say, hey, Michael and Darlene recommended we come, people just need to see what a beautiful thing it is to not be a homogeneous church only. Yeah, I just think it's amazing. You're a veritable rainbow of color, and I love that. Now, I mean, applaud for that. That is so unique. I think you know that. Maybe you don't. But when you work at as many churches as I do, when you see it, you go, man, I wish this could just happen in more places. Question, do you feel socially dislocated like the homogeneous unit principle says? I hope not. Now, maybe at times you do, right? But hopefully you adjust to that and you figure it out as you go along. But when you sit next to your siblings of all different colors and backgrounds week after week, there's something that makes it feel normal and good. And may I say better and more like God intended it to be. That's what I feel every Sunday when I'm hanging out with you guys. And then there's the socioeconomic differences and class distinctions, right? Income. There's some wealthy people that are part of New City Church, and there's some people that haven't had a job in a long time. And that's how this church works. There's education. You've got people that didn't finish high school here, and you've got people with doctoral degrees sitting in the same church. Occupation, you got blue collar, white collar, no collar, rainbow collar. You got I made that last one up. You got all kinds of things. Housing, some people have really nice homes, and some whose home is the sidewalk of downtown LA, or maybe Union Rescue Mission or another mission, right? I read Revelation 7 this week. Verses 9 and 10, which is sort of a vision of what heaven will be like, whatever that's going to look like. And it just says this, John says this, after this I looked, and there was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, robed in white, with palm branches in their hands. They cried out in a loud voice, saying, salvation belongs to our God, who is seated on the throne and to the Lamb. Now, isn't that a beautiful picture of that future state? That you're not going to be surrounded by a bunch of people that look just like you. Heaven is meant to be full of diversity, full of color, full of variety, right? It just meant to be that way. So here's a little thing. One, you learned a principle, the homogeneous unit principle. Donald McGavran, he's dead, long dead now. Fuller Seminary, he was wrong. It doesn't always work, and it shouldn't always work, and you're proof of that thing. So here's a little assignment. don't ignore those realities of what this community is to you. Lean into them, love them, discuss them, cherish them, brag about them, right? I mean, I was feeling a little fun, like I want to say these things in a way that doesn't offend anybody, and I hope I don't by that, because I absolutely love what exists in this place, and it is so rare and so unique. And I think you need to talk about them more among yourselves, and then as you do talk about them, figure out ways to share that goodness with other people, right? Not to say we figured it out, we got it right, and you do it wrong, but a way to say, can we just show you what a joy it is to be with people who are different than you? Because every neighborhood, even neighborhoods like, excuse me, where Darlene and I live down in Orange County, there's a lot of white. Every neighborhood has people that are from different backgrounds and different colors and different whatever, right? You can find it even when it's not all the same. I do share this in other churches in other states, and they're like, but we don't have any people of color around us. I'm like, go find them. You're not looking. They're there. They're scared of you because they think they won't fit into the midst of it all. So I think you guys just talk about it more. I hope that can be a gift to you. Just take it and do something fun with it. Here's a second one. That love is the most important fruit that holds a church together. I've really learned that. Can we clap for that one? Love is the most important fruit that holds a church together. There is someone at New City Church who has told me that I am loved more than anyone in my life this last year, even my wife, and that's Phil Bell. Phil Bell, every Sunday, tells me, he gives me a hug and whispers in my ear, okay, this is a secret, but he goes, I love you, brother. Now, he does that to more people too, I know, but I didn't know how much I needed that until someone does that for me every Sunday. And it's true, because while many of you show love in different ways, Phil puts it in words and in enthusiasm, excitement, some shouts, and I absolutely love that. Thank you, brother. When Phil's not here on a Sunday, you feel a difference, right? There's definitely a little less enthusiasm. Sometimes I walked out one of the first Sundays, and I'm like, man, there was no responses to anything I said in the message that day. Someone said Phil wasn't there. So I'm like, oh, that's the impetus and energy behind so many things. When I met you all a year ago, I knew I was getting into something potentially really tangled up and messy with some pain and that needed a lot of work. I knew I would have to say some hard things. I knew I would have to mediate some hard discussions. I knew I would have to kind of hold up a mirror that you wouldn't always like what you see. I knew that if I said the wrong thing or even said the right thing at the wrong time, you might even fire me. And I didn't think that was a reality till 3 years ago. I was working with a church in Idaho, and I said the right things in the wrong way at the wrong time to them, and they fired me. They said, see ya. We don't want to hear it anymore after a couple months. So that's always a potential. But after the dust settles from all of that transition and all that stuff that we've been working on, it comes back to one thing: love. Love holds it together. You guys know? Yeah. The staff deeply loves you, New City. Staff deeply loves you. They've spent, let's give it up for the staff. They've spent dozens of hours, maybe hundreds of hours, working through what a friend of mine calls their stuff. Because every team has its stuff. You just do. And we've been doing that since day one. They tell you the very first staff meeting we had, the stuff hit the fan. And we worked through stuff, and now the joy and unity that I see on that staff is such a blessing. And yeah, they'll tell you about that. And I love seeing them in the midst of that. The elders deeply love you, New City Church. And they don't even get paid to love you like the staff does. And they also loved you enough to do what most churches in transition never do, and that's look outside the church to find someone or people that could come help through a transition. Most churches try to figure it out themselves, which sometimes works and usually doesn't. So I'm so thankful that the elders have done that and had a chance to work on that transition over the last year plus. The LP&C, right, the lead pastor nominating committee who did the pastoral search, for those of you that don't know, they love the church enough to spend over a year, 14 months, I think, of time, also unpaid, mind you, to tirelessly search for your new lead pastor, and look who they found, right? Pastor Phyllis. Pastor Phyllis. She's standing right out there, so I think she can hear you. So I can see her, but yeah, such an amazing pastor as I've gotten to know Pastor Phyllis. It's just such a blessing. You guys are in for a treat. You're in for a ride. The lay leaders of this church that lead ministries and grow serve groups and invite people into all kinds of things, they love this church and spend countless hours pouring their lives into the people. The setup team loves this church so much. Yeah, can we just really give it up for them? The setup team loves the church so much that they get out of bed really early on Sunday mornings to come to this place, go to the basement, dig out a bunch of equipment, haul it up elevators when the elevators work, and set up in different places around this building, which sometimes we don't even know if it's in the right place, or set it up in the wrong place, and then it has to get moved, so that all of us can be together for 90 minutes with God, with each other, and receive something we need to make it through the next week. It's hard being a portable church, except with love. That's what they do it for, because they're not getting paid. They do it for love. And a little shameless plug, setup team could use some help. So if any of you want to get up in bed early and go to the basement and take that stuff up elevators, go talk to Karen or Jenny or Pastor James, and they would love your help, because a church that's portable needs that kind of love every Sunday. And it's hard. It is hard. And you've been a portable church now for 17 years. Yeah. Give it up for them. The givers of this church, and you know who you are, love this church so much that they sacrificially give of their resources to make sure all of this can happen. And that those who don't have the means to give can also be part of this community. It takes resources to make it happen. We so appreciate those of you that are able to give and give so generously and sacrificially. The visitors and first-time guests that come take a risk of visiting a place like this. They're looking for a safe place to be in community with other people who are trying to figure out how to follow Jesus in the midst of crazy times in which we're all living together. And they're looking to see if you have love, real love, not just words of love, but where they know they won't be judged for who they are or where they're coming from or their color or their income level or their sexual orientation or their mental health or anything. How do I know that? Because on Sundays when I get to meet some of the people that are checking this church out, and it's an amazing blessing. Go stand under that tent, and maybe that'd be something you'd like to do too, is meet new people. I can feel the reticence. I can feel the kind of, is this going to be a church that actually loves me? Or the ones that say they love me, but will only love me if I change something about me. You can feel that. A few weeks ago, I actually had somebody ask me, will this church love me if I, and they filled in a blank for me, and I was able to say, absolutely yes, right? Because you're New City Church, yeah. You are different, and you've got to lean into that and be that thing. 1 John 4, 7 through 11. Pastor Anthony shared a great message on love. You can go back and listen to this. I feel like I'm duplicating him here, but this is so important. Beloved, let us love one another because love is from God. Everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, for God is love. Beloved, since God loved us so much, we also ought to love one another. Amen? It's about love. It's the greatest. Here's a little assignment with the love thing, okay? A little assignment for this one. Every week that you're part of this community, I would like you to look for one way to take that love that others have given to you and pass it on to one other person, okay? Just one. I mean, maybe it's more if you've got enough in your own tank to give away that much. But I'm going to just suggest look for one person, and maybe it's just something as simple as a word of encouragement. Maybe it's just a prayer. Maybe it's just a smile and say, you look awesome this morning. Or I'm so glad you're part of our church. I'm so glad we could be together today. It's only 90 minutes. Look for one way to pass that love on. You do it already. But for those of you that aren't, I think it'd be really cool if you amped it up in the next few months, right? With Pastor Phyllis here and just New City entering into some new ways and doing some new things together. I think that would be so cool. Here's a third one. That a third way approach to theology and community allows people to learn over time, right? Some of you, maybe most of you, have heard that, New City takes this third way approach. You might call it a philosophy or a perspective to things. In fact, the first place I ever heard the phrase third way be applied to the church was several years ago, and it was from New City Church. And I thought, this is interesting. What's third way? Because I knew kind of is it a political term, and it's it's used in different environments and contexts. But what is third way? It's an option. When any option can be regarded as an alternative to two extremes. Now, we don't live in a culture that is given to extremes, do we? No, by any means, right? It looks for a way, for example, to be inclusive of others versus exclusive, kind of keeping others away. And I let you in on a little secret. Many churches are very exclusive. So this is, again, a gift that New City gives that I've learned from you of what it looks like to be very, very inclusive. Right? You're looking for ways to include people. Because honestly, it's easier and more comfortable to exclude anyone and everyone who has a different view or belief than you do, or I do. I absolutely love the saying, I want this to be true of me. Maybe you want it to be true of you as well. I would rather be excluded for who I include than included for who I exclude. Let me say it one more time. I would rather be excluded for who I include than included for who I exclude. We are living in a day where many churches are the latter, right? They are proud of their exclusion. And I think that is a horrible sin. I do not think that's gospel. I do not think that is following Jesus. And I have learned from you, New City, of how to be a different kind of wonderfully loving, inclusive church. Thank you for being that. Yeah, clap. You can clap for yourselves for that one too. This is really hard. I'm not saying it's easy because we don't like being around people who see the world differently than we do. If you don't think so, if you don't believe that, have you ever given your opinion about something that someone else sees differently? Like a place where you like to eat, right? Like who's the In-N-Out people in the room? You like to eat at In-N-Out. Yeah. I like Five Guys. A couple of you. You can beat us up later. Every time I say that, all the In-N-Out people are like, boo! Five Guys is terrible. I don't like it. It's just a simple little thing, but it comes up, right? How about the way people like to dress? You got the sport coats and you got the hoodies, okay? You got the hoodies need to be welcomed here. Tuesday at staff meeting, I wore my hoodie in honor of Pastor James and my last staff meeting here. So yeah, go hoodies. What about our electronics? iPhone versus Android, or worse yet, Mac versus PC, right? I'm a little weird because I have an iPhone and I have a PC, so I kind of like travel the different things. I'm bi, I guess, in that way. I didn't mean that the way it sounded, but you know what I mean. Sports. Is there anybody else than Dodger fans here? So we think, yeah, Dodgers, right? I'm scared to death to say I live in Orange County because you might think I'm an Angels fan. I'm not. I grew up in LA. I've always been a Dodger fan, right? Yeah. Okay. See, I'm causing conflict already here, right in the service. If you think that those cause some conflict, how about even some deeper issues? What's your political party? Right? I had a lady come up to me once in a service, not in this church, in another church, and she was crying. And I just said, what's wrong? She said, I'm scared to death to tell anybody in this church that I'm a Democrat. Because she thought she would be so persecuted. And I had to love her and help her know that it would be okay. And I thought it would be okay, but I'm not sure she ever felt really safe. Or theology, we don't have time to talk about this and unpack it this morning, but, all different doctrines and areas of theology. Your soteriology, doctrine of salvation. Are you Reformed or are you Arminian? Is it universalism or particularism? The sovereignty of God versus open theism. Anthropology, original sin or original blessing and goodness. Your eschatology, is there heaven or is it annihilation? I could go on and on. You're like, what the heck did he just talk about? There are so many areas. And honestly, churches have to kind of journey through those things. But the goal that you have is to be third way. You're not going to exclude someone because they have a different theological view than you, I hope, right? And you've proved you can truly live in a third way with one huge issue, LGBTQ inclusion. And I admire you for doing that. I know you've lost people because of that. And this issue has torn more denominations apart than any other. Now, I've shared my story in another sermon that I gave many months ago here about how 7 years ago, God challenged me in the midst of a sabbatical to stop being so judgmental. I didn't think that I was. I just didn't. And then God used my LGBTQ plus siblings to help me see that they deserve to be not only included in the church and in our lives and in our friendships, but in everything. That they weren't on the outside, that they didn't need to change. And my problem, and the reason I was coming from that place, is I didn't know any LGBTQ folks at the time, personally. I just didn't. But now I do. Now I do. In fact, Darlene and I have been part of a church for the past 6 years that's inclusive and affirming, and we only on our soul leader team and board now have people that at least take a third-way perspective of that thing, because this is tough. The church continues to wrestle with these issues, and you, New City, have modeled what it means to love and include those of all orientations, not just those who fit into the guidelines that much of the evangelical church has said is the only way to see the issues. So when it comes to challenging issues like this, we all need to keep on learning, keep on stretching, keep on growing, keep on loving. Did you know that a huge number of folks that visit New City are LGBTQ+, looking for a safe church to be a part of? How do I know that? Because I talk to them, right? Because I meet them, and hopefully many of you do as well. Because there aren't a lot of churches where it feels safe to be. And that's a shame. So just lean into that, be that. Don't be surprised if some of your greatest growth in the days ahead come from LGBTQ+ folks, because they're looking for a church just like you. And there's something you should know about, and it's a book called The Widening of God's Mercy by Richard Hayes and Christopher Hayes. Christopher is a professor at Fuller Seminary, again, right here in Pasadena. Richard Hayes just passed away a couple of months ago. But they wrote a book because Richard Hayes had written a book way back, many years ago, decades ago. And it was a book on theology and ethics. And he got to the place where he changed his mind. And what he did is they both have written a wonderful book that looks at the trajectory in Scripture of the way God widens God's mercy for people and how people get included that were previously excluded. And I love that. So if you really want to dive in deep and look at a different perspective, that book just came out a few months ago, The Widening of God's Mercy by Hayes and Hayes. And I just am so thankful that they did that research. We're following Jesus, right? John 1:14. And the Word became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen his glory. It's talking about Jesus, the glory of a Father's only Son, full of what? Grace and what? Truth. It's not just one, right? So many churches are full of truth and have no grace, and that's just legalism. And there's other churches that got a lot of grace but no truth, and that's just a party. Jesus is full of grace and truth, and that's what you are, New City. Follow Jesus, be full of grace and truth. I said I had a whole long list. I just want to share a couple others. I'm not going to unpack them. I'm just going to tell you what they were, of the things that I've learned from you at New City. One would be that my whiteness can really get in the way of understanding other cultures and ethnicity. And honestly, maybe you laugh at it. I didn't know that. I didn't feel white before until I met all you and got to hang out with you every single Sunday. And now I feel really white. Like, yeah, and in a good way. Like, and I don't overly notice that, but I do it in such a way that I feel way more comfortable in a multi-ethnic group that's truly like this than I do, like I said, in a church that's all white. Pray for Darlene and I as we go out and try to fit into some other spaces. And one last thing is that the things I might not understand about others might be the very things I need to learn to grow in my own life. I don't understand all of you. I don't. I try. I listen, right? Hopefully I'm approachable enough and I try to listen and I want to understand, but I always don't. But I found that over the last year, it has been such a beautiful thing that when I do, there's almost always something I need to learn. I need to change. I need to repent of. You've helped me to do that, New City. And if I could just wrap it up and summarize, one thing I've learned from all of you at New City would be to not take myself so seriously. Not take myself so seriously. I take myself kind of way too seriously sometimes. It's just my personality. Darlene would tell you. She's known me for 41 years. Bless her. Bless her that she stayed with me all those years. I am not an easy person to live with. But I can be really rough. And I take myself so seriously sometimes, and I've learned from you to not do that. I don't want to take myself so seriously. 44 years ago, I heard I'll call it a poem, a writing. It's called If I Had My Life to Live Over. And I literally typed it out and I hung it on my wall. And for many, many years, it was hanging on my wall. It's not there anymore. I don't know where it is now. But it marked me then, but it reminded me this week that you have helped me to live my life by taking God far more seriously and not taking myself seriously. And here's what it says. I just want to read it to you. I'd dare to make more mistakes next time. I'd relax. I would limber up. I would be sillier than I've been this trip. I would take fewer things seriously. I would take more chances. I would take more trips. I would climb more mountains and swim more rivers and watch more sunsets. I would eat more ice cream and less beans. I would perhaps have more actual troubles, and I'd have fewer imaginary ones. You see, I'm one of those people who live sensibly and sanely, hour after hour, day after day. Oh, I've had my moments, and if I had it to do over again, I'd have more of them. In fact, I'd try to have nothing else, just moments, one after another, instead of living so many years ahead of each day. I've been one of those people who never go anywhere without a thermometer, a hot water bottle, a raincoat, and a parachute. If I had my life to live over, I would start barefoot earlier in the spring and stay that way later in the fall. If I had to do it again, I would travel lighter next time. I would play hooky more. I wouldn't make such good grades, except by accident. I would go to more dances. I would ride more merry-go-rounds. I would pick more daisies. God, help us to not take ourselves too seriously, ever, but to take you very seriously, to take the community that we're a part of, like New City Church, very seriously, and to be able to smile when we make a mistake, when we say something, to be able to go to a friend and confess if we've said something hurtful, to apologize, to take ownership of something, and to try to learn, because we're only on this trip one time here. Thank you for walking with us in the midst of every journey. God, Darlene and I thank you for every single thing that we've learned from the people of New City Church, from the 17 years that this church has been in this community. God, I pray a prayer of blessing too for New City in the days ahead, for Pastor Phyllis's leadership, and for all the wonderful things that the future holds. So excited to see what's going to happen and what those things are going to be. We look forward with anticipation and hopefully a spirit of love, that spirit of diversity, and a spirit of inclusion for everybody around us. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.